AP European folks. I'm wearing a Yoda shirt tonight. Trust me, Jedi I am. Let's think. Yoda and I actually have a lot of things in common. Number one, we're both kind of short. He's not very tall. Number two, not a lot of hair up on top. Kind of sparse up there. Number three, we know a lot about the past. I've read quite a few books, and Yoda's 900 years old, so he knows a lot. Number four, Jedi Master. No, that'd be just Yoda. Just Yoda's the Jedi Master. I'm not. Good job. Halfway through that sentence, you went, wait a second, is Holliday a Jedi? He can't be. He isn't. Okay? I'm going to do the first installment of Unit 3 on the In Case You Missed It front. Someone asked about it in class today. That was Mikey, actually, in 6th period, so shout out to Mikey. Word up. And here it is. Here's Unit 3 on the study guide. That's what the study guide looks like. Of course, yours doesn't look like that because it's all filled in, right? Right? Of course it is. It's completely filled in. There's no way it wouldn't be. Okay? So I'm going to just roll my way through the study guide and talk a little bit about absolutism. That's going to be our big trend. There may be more little videos this time. I tried to upload like a 13-minute one that I did, and it wouldn't work. So if you're technologically brilliant, you can help me out with that. Let me know in class what I'm doing wrong. But for now, I'm just going to go with a couple shorter ones. Here we go. We start out with this diagram, and the purpose behind the diagram is having Louis XIV, the Sun King, at the center. Louis believed himself to be this divine right monarch who was born with the sole purpose of ruling not just France, but being sort of the central ruler of Europe. I've already done a Louis XIV video, so you can seek it out and have a look at how Louis changed the notions of what monarchies were supposed to be. But for our purposes on the sheet here, let me just briefly talk about each of the four orbs that are circling the sun, right? They're circling the sun because Louis is the sun. You get it? It's supposed to be cool. If you're looking at it going, oh my god, that's like really not that cool at all. And sometimes I don't get it. Whatever. All right, starting at the top, limiting the nobility and Versailles. Louis invited all of these nobles, in fact required the nobles to come to Versailles in order to spend time with him so that he could really restrain them. He hoped that the nobles would have very little power throughout France, and by having them at Versailles, he could keep them doing really petty, silly little chores and assure that they weren't up to much bigger, more dangerous things at home. Versailles served as a perfect playground that way. Hey, my wife's here. Hey, honey, how's it going?
Good.
There you go. Number two, Louis used mercantilism in order to try and make the economy more powerful. Now, the French economy is always going to struggle. Why? Because if you're an absolutist, you got two questions to answer. Number one, what do you do with your nobles? And we know what Louis does with them, Versailles. And number two, how do you pay for it? How do you pay for the cool-looking robes and the really cool-looking shoes and the wars and the palaces and the parties? It is hard to do. Unless you're rolling in with some sort of Jay-Z wad of money, it's going to be hard to do. So Louis's mercantilist policies were designed to try and improve the overall economy of France. They pushed French colonies, they pushed trade abroad, they tried to start as many domestic industries as possible, they increased taxes, they became more efficient at collecting taxes, but at the end of the day, you're not going to do anything really, because Louis XIV spends way more than you take in. So you're just going to have to live with the fact that there's a debt. And that debt's going to be a huge problem in about 100 years. Huge! Going around the circle here, expanding the borders. Specifically here, we're talking about the War of the Spanish Succession, where Louis tried to increase the realm of France. There's a video about that, so go have a look at it. And lastly, religious harmony. Now, in the United States in 2013, when you say harmony, you really mean everyone gets along, and we all agree that differences are fantastic. Louis didn't think that. In the Edict of Fontainebleau, Louis in 1685 rescinded the Edict of Nantes that had been passed by Louis's predecessor Henry IV, and the edict's goal was to eliminate the Huguenot minority within France and assure that we had one king, one faith, and that way that there would be more harmony in Louis's eyes, a very different view of what we thought harmony should be. Flipping the page. On the next page, we have some pretenders, individuals who are going to try and do what Louis is doing, but they're doing it in Eastern Europe. Now, Eastern Europe's a different set of situations because, generally speaking, the territories are larger, the people are less refined, there's less business, so the economy is going to be even less versatile than it is, say, in France or England. It's just not as easy to be a monarch here as far as absolutism goes. Starting at the top, we have the Prussians. When a lot of those people who left France after the Edict of Fontainebleau were looking for somewhere to go, they went to Prussia. Prussia might not seem like a name you know at all. That's probably the one country you went so far, or that we've had so far where you went, what's that? Prussia is eventually Germany. So Prussia is the territories in northern Central Europe that are going to combine together to make the German state here in about 200 years. For now, the Hohenzollern family is going to rule over the area. The king at this point is Frederick William the Great Elector. The Hohenzollerns are very uncreative, so you got to give the people titles. Frederick William the Great Elector, that's the title. How did he create royal or absolute power? He made a deal with his nobles, and here's the deal. You give me absolute power. I guarantee you that the place will be secure and stable, and in return, here's what I'm going to give to the nobles. The nobles are going to get control of their estates, they're going to get freedom from taxation, and also the best jobs in the bureaucracy and the army, which they want anyway. So that's kind of a win-win all the way around. The relationship with the nobles then is key, unlike Louis XIV, who's bringing his nobles close to him in order to assure that they do no wrong or they do nothing to challenge him. In Prussia, and we're going to see this in Russia as well, we are bringing the nobles close to us in order to give them power and then sending them back out into the empire to spread the great word. Economic changes. The Prussians don't have a lot of what the world wants right now. Agricultural commodities aren't growing well. The 30 Years' War has just ended. This is a thrashed country. Now, when we get to the 19th century and we're looking for iron ore and coal deposits, just you wait. In Austria, we're going to see a much lower sort of absolutism taking place. The royal family in Austria is the Habsburgs, and the Habsburgs had such a diverse country that they realized they couldn't press their hand against their nobles. They couldn't really try and contain them as much as you would try to in France or in Prussia or in Russia. And so when we look at this chart, the steps taken to create absolute power really doesn't make sense for the Austrians, because they're going to try, but they're really not going to force society to be contained. The relationship with the nobles in Austria lived with more freedom than anywhere else, probably. Lastly, the Russians. Peter the Great's a fantastic figure, one of the real characters we meet in Western civilization. You know, Peter's out there burning the beards off of nobles or shearing them off. He liked to toss a couple of midgets around, you know, like you do. And he's really just an interesting character. The Romanovs had risen to power in Russia, and Peter is the first significant individual who's going to try and extend that power beyond a traditional Western European base for the Russians. Peter really realizes that Russia has to be more Western. That the notion that Russian people are Eastern is limiting the Russians in an enormous way. So what do? We put together a huge army, a standing army of about 200,000, a la Louis XIV. We put together a wonderful city like St. Petersburg, a la Louis XIV. We put together a meritocracy where we use the best people within the society and we promote them and give them the accolades in order to assure that we get the best out of everyone. And at the same time, we also begin to tax the people. Now, the Russians simply do not have the resources. This is a country that barely can feed itself. So if you can't feed yourself, you're not thinking about much economic growth. Your central question is, how do I get enough food? For right now, economics is always going to be hard. When Peter needed to raise money, he taxed, and he basically enslaved the peasants from different towns in order to build St. Petersburg. It's not a brisk, thriving economy like the Dutch or the English. On the very bottom of this second page, I see the Polish. The Polish are an example in how absolutism can sometimes be something you might seek. Poland had such a strong noble population that the absolutist kings could not press themselves upon the noble population. What that meant is that when the neighboring countries of Austria and Prussia and Russia came attacking, no one in Poland stood up for the country, and eventually it's going to get sliced to pieces over 3 separate scenarios, and by 1795, Poland's going to be erased from the map. And that's what you get sometimes. So absolutism is a positive in some cases and a negative in others. We've really done just the first 2 pages or so, folks. In a moment, I'm going to get back on here and do the Stuart Kings and talk a little bit about the Dutch as well. Hope you're having a good night. Take care.